Oh, okay. All right, good. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Robert Clifford from Chicago. I'm lead counsel on the Ethiopian Airlines 302 crash litigation pending in Chicago on behalf of the families. These hearings, both the Senate and House, have been extraordinarily helpful to the families in getting to the real core issues that the litigation will focus on. Certainly the congressional leadership has the subpoena power. They have the weight of the U.S. government behind them in the requests that have been made. Frankly, there are documents that we're seeing today for the first time, yesterday for the first time, that we think should have been produced, some of which maybe have been by Boeing in the litigation. So the litigation itself, in terms of the discovery process, has been lagging behind because we have to defer to the Department of Justice investigation, the NTSB investigation, everything that's going on in Ethiopia and in Jakarta, as well as everything that's taking place here in the House and the Senate. But this information, we've been given great access from both the Senate and the House to this data. We'll use it on behalf of the families. The families have been meeting with Boeing, as you know, yesterday, and actually there was one meeting last week in Chicago with Mr. Bahi Demisi from Ethiopia, who lost his wife, who was one of the flight attendants. That was a private meeting, and all of these meetings have been very helpful to the families, and they've asked that we express appreciation to Boeing for that. So certainly I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the litigation itself. It's pending before Judge Jorge Luis Alonso and Judge David Wiseman in Chicago. The next big hearing date is November 21st in Chicago. In the interim period of time, we're working with Boeing to have them produce literally hundreds of thousands of pages of material to us, all about the not only the design and manufacture of the 737 MAX 8, but also the things that transpired between the Lion Air crash in October of 2018 and the Ethiopian crash in March of 2019.
So you said that some of these hearings are helpful to the families, but we just spoke to one of the families and said that this resembled more of a show, that nothing was getting done.
Well, you know, I can understand that. I'm talking from the litigation perspective, because what happens is a lot of times in litigation, you ask a defendant what time of day it is, and they tell you how to build a watch. And you know, we don't want that. We want to know what time of day it is. So we want to get to the core materials as quickly as we can. And I assure you that the information that's been supplied to Congress, the House and Senate, also to the DOJ, and to the NTSB, is a lot of that core data that we'll get access to at an earlier time and an earlier date than we might otherwise. That's the context in which I say it's helpful. I mean, frankly, the families think that a lot of what's going on here is kind of, you know, congressional rope-a-dope, right? And I get that. But the reality is, from a litigator's perspective, from a trial lawyer's perspective, I'm looking for the hot documents, and you've seen some of them here today and yesterday.
What significant new evidence are you seeing?
Well, the knowledge. You know, you just heard a congressman ask a question, you know, who would think that Boeing in their right mind would ignore or conceal information about a defective product? And frankly, you know, you can go through airplane crash after airplane crash, for me, beginning with the DC-10s that crashed back in 79 and 89, to see that sometimes manufacturers, good people, cut corners because they're assuming that there's no single point of failure. You know, when he said this morning that there wasn't a prior crash, I did the litigation of the DC-10 that crashed in Sioux City, Iowa, and we learned that GE hid information about the defects in their titanium discs from the manufacturer of the aircraft, McDonnell Douglas, and they all assumed that the other one had a safety fail-safe, and they didn't. Those kind of things do happen here. And the idea that this MCAS system and the performance of it was kept from the pilots is an outrageous thing. And you know, early on, I was here in the hearing in May. I recall them blaming the pilots in May. Now they're not blaming the pilots, but they're talking about pilot training. I don't know, maybe is that a play on words? But the reality is there are defects in this system that people knew about and had notice about. And that notice will lead to punitive damage claims being made against Boeing in the litigation in Chicago.
Specifically, in the 4 slides that we were presented, they showed essentially that there were internal discussions within Boeing long before that were
Correct.
not followed through in what we actually were seeing. How significant is it, and how significant is it from the point of view of Boeing constantly saying that they, quote, made mistakes?
Well, look, Boeing will take the view, I'm certain, in the courtroom, that none of what you hear here is legally admissible as an admission of responsibility on the lawsuits. In fact, in the lawsuits, they are denying responsibility. There are answers to all of the complaints, the lawsuit documents. Here, they're talking about the verbiage of responsibility and accountability. That's a lot of PR from my perspective, just like initially when they came out with the $100 million fund on July 3rd, on the eve of our nation's holiday, without any protocols at all for how to give the money away. It was a pivot to change the PR rhetoric of what was taking place at that time. But the documents that we're seeing now, that you've seen in the last 2 days, will be essential to the proofs to show that there were people within the organization who had knowledge of the performance of the MCAS within the normal flight operation envelope, which is what they're talking about, and that the pilots should have been told. And if there's anything that's not taking place here that we're a little surprised about, is that there's not a lot of focus being placed on the placement of these engines. And when you talk about revealing the existence of the MCAS system, well, that made a material difference in whether you do or you don't have to have pilots go through simulation training. And that, you heard the dollar amount today. If we have to retrain your pilots and simulators because of this, we'll give you $1 million rebate. Well, that's an amazing statistic if you think about it. This was all designed to get this airplane in the skies ahead of their competition with Airbus. Just look at what's happening in China now. In China, Boeing holds a 47, 43% lead in the marketplace. And the China market is going to explode in the next several years. You heard the testimony about that today. Well, that's what is a big concern to Boeing. Now, is that putting dollars before safety? Some would argue that it does. But all good people, they don't wake up in the morning intending to commit a harm. Doctors don't wake up in the morning intending to commit medical negligence, but we all wake up in the morning with the capacity to run a red light, and sometimes we do. And here, they didn't run a red light, they ran a yellow light, and then the red light, and they shouldn't have done that. Okay.
Bob Clifford. Clifford Law Offices in Chicago. He's founder and senior partner, but also lead counsel of this litigation of the Ethiopian crash litigation that's pending in Chicago Federal District Court. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, buddy. Good luck.
My daughter's friend, Stephanie Williams.
I'll get out of your way.
What are your thoughts as you're hearing this today?
I'm horrified. We did meet with Mr. Muilenburg yesterday. I had no idea that he got a $15 million bonus after he killed my daughter. I'm just horrified. Like what they were saying, that's the opposite of accountability. That's a praise for having a crash like that. And then hearing the details of what people knew, they raised their hands, they said things are going wrong, the production is going too fast, people are tired, and what did he do? He sort of just looked around and said, oh, everything's good. That's basically what he said. He wasn't in there. We kind of looked around. It was all fine. It was all fine. Why would the guy? It's intimidating to reach the CEO of Boeing. It's intimidating. You would have a motivation to do that. It wouldn't be for no reason, because you would be putting yourself in the spotlight. So I am absolutely horrified at what I'm hearing today. And it's a good thing for him that we didn't know this yesterday when we had our meeting with him. We really were listening to him, hearing him say, I want to be accountable, I'm accountable. Well, this is not accountable. Yesterday I asked him, I said, you should resign because you and your team made decisions which caused these crashes. And so you shouldn't be continuing making any more decisions. You're not the person to do this. and he said he doesn't quit, he follows through in difficult situations, but he is not the human being to be doing this job, and neither is his board, and neither are the other executives, who I guess all got bonuses. I don't know what their bonuses were, but obviously he got a bonus, they all got bonuses. That's horrifying. People who cause huge accidents like this, that's not accountability, and that's not good for the public and passengers.
Do you think that plane should fly again?
No, I definitely don't think it should fly again with the information that I have right now, because the plane has never been evaluated as a whole. So it has all of these parts that have been added on to the original 1967 type certificate, and they've saved a lot of money by not bringing the other parts of the plane up to the current day's standard. And there's reasons we have standards, because there's been accidents and problems, and so we develop standards from that. We learn. And they saved money, $7 billion apparently, by not having all of the parts of the plane come up to today's standard, by having the old, it's referring back to the old type. So I think that unless they recertify the whole plane as a unit, with, you know, comprehensively, that it shouldn't fly. And they should make sure to follow the recommendations of the JATR report and the NTSB. They should follow all that before they put the plane back in the air. When we talked to the FAA, they're like, yeah, they turned in all of their stuff. We have 2 weeks. We have about 2 more weeks of evaluation, meaning that they're going to approve the plane to fly again without a full evaluation. How can they do that? We're here to try to prevent a third crash. We don't want any other families to be feeling what we're feeling. It's horrendous. After a plane crashes, you can't get your loved one's body back. It's all in pieces. We don't want anyone to go through this.
Ma'am, I was in the Senate above you yesterday, and you were trying to hold your pictures up, and you were kind of in a dispute there. If you can turn that around a little bit, which one is your relative?
My daughter's right here.
That's your daughter.
Yeah, here's another picture of her right there.
Right.
Can you tell us about
Do you feel your story is getting out?
Right now it is, because we're having the hearing. My concern is that weeks will pass and the FAA will just put the plane back in the air without any scrutiny. They have the power to do that. The only reason they wouldn't is from public pressure. But they literally could do it in 2 weeks if they chose to. But it's absolutely wrong and inappropriate.
You met with Dennis Muilenburg last night.
Yes, yesterday.
You sound completely unsatisfied.
Yes, I'm very unsatisfied. I want him to resign. I want his team to resign. I don't think that they did well by us and by the Indonesian passengers, and they shouldn't keep making decisions. They're unfit.
Give me your name again.
Nadia Milleron, Nadiamilleron.
Samya's your daughter.
Samya.
Yeah. Were you at the annual meeting, the shareholders meeting? Because other people were there.
My brother was there.
Your brother, I talked to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Matthew, do
Thank
you
you.
want to introduce Ralph is here? Ralph
Mr. Nader?
Nader is here. This is his niece. And not her brother. Here.
Nun, can you hold the picture and I'll just move out of the way?
This is also
You've been handing out buttons today, sir. Tell us, should this plane ever fly again?
There should be a consumer boycott of this plane. It's inherently unstable, which is escaping the attention of the House and Senate committees. The basic problem is in their rush to market, the Boeing marketeers overruled the Boeing engineers, and they allowed larger engines placed in different ways that overloaded an ancient fuselage designed in the 1960s. That increased the MAX's prone to stall, and they tried to fix it with a software MCAS. You don't fix a hardware defect with a flawed, complex software fix. In the 737-300, the FAA required Boeing to alter the frame. They didn't do it in this situation. And Congress is responsible completely. Congress has cut the FAA budget, they've cut the FAA authority, they've allowed Boeing to regulate the FAA instead of the reverse. And here they are standing here, focusing on the MCAS instead of the fundamental design defect that's going to launch 5,000 MAXs, carrying hundreds of millions of people in the future. Notice, there hasn't been, in 1 year, there hasn't been a single comprehensive bill introduced to reauthorize and refund the FAA. What does that tell you? This is a kabuki show. It's a kabuki theater here. Nobody's really serious. Does anybody think in Congress that there's going to be legislation that's going to regulate Boeing? Boeing gives campaign contributions to 330 members of Congress, including a majority of this committee. And the airlines give freebies that are denied ordinary mortals like airline passengers, such as reservation fee exemptions, free upgrades. This is a corrupt situation here with the airlines and the aircraft manufacturers. And so everybody focuses on the FAA. Now, Elwell and Bahraini should resign. They allowed this to happen, they encouraged this to happen, but their defense is that the 2018 FAA Authorization Act forced them to increase the abdication of regulatory authority to Boeing to certify itself. So the problem's right here on Capitol Hill. 535 men and women who put their shoes on just like we do every morning. And the focus has got to be on the aerodynamic instability design. Who pointed that out? Captain Sullenberger in his testimony on page 2. Go look at it. He said that's what led to the need for the MCAS. That's what led to the need for the software, which has its own criminal negligence context involving Boeing and the FAA. This is a situation of criminal negligence at the least of what's going on here.
2 days, 2 hearings. Will this change anything in your opinion?
It'll inform the public because of you. The media's done an extraordinary job reporting on the 737 MAX, and I don't praise the media very often, but you got to give credit where credit is due. But don't think these people are going to actually push for legislation. Even the leading champion of reauthorizing the regulatory authority of the FAA, Senator Richard Blumenthal, still has not gotten a single Republican on the Senate committee to co-sponsor it. So it hasn't been introduced yet. This is a year after the disaster in Indonesia and over 6 months after the disaster in Ethiopia. So I think the media's got to become much more probing and much more skeptical and not be drawn into the quicksand of the complexities of the MCAS. By the way, a software fix cannot envision all the configurations. It cannot force the nose down 23 times the way it did in Indonesia. You can force it down once or twice. But it's a very flawed fix. It's not good human systems engineering. You have to design for the pilots, as the board, the NTSB said. You have to design the plane for pilots who are in a startled position and may not react as the spreadsheet artists at Boeing think they're supposed to react.
In all your years of consumer advocacy, how does this matter compare?
Well, I wrote a book called Collision Course in 1994, where I gave voice to very considered criticisms of the FAA. It's gotten much worse. The FAA has been stripped of its authority, stripped of its political backing, stripped of its budget, and stripped of its mission, in effect. Boeing now regulates the FAA.
Do you think there's any practical case to completely bring delegation in-house into the FAA? They say they don't have the technical staff or the resources to do it.
Well, they should. The aerospace industry is huge, isn't it? So when Elwell says to the Senate in testimony weeks ago, why it's going to take 10,000 more people and 1.8 billion more a year, my answer is, well, so what? You've got $1 trillion industry here affecting the lives of hundreds of thousands of people every day. And you're worried about 1.8 billion? The Pentagon swallows that in a day.
Any other questions for Mr. Nader?
What do you think of the documents that Boeing has apparently withheld?
They have withheld all the aerodynamic tests and data regarding the alteration of the MAX, that is the larger engines, in order to compete with the Airbus 320neo for fuel efficiency, change the center of gravity and increase the prone to stall. And they did that to get the market. It was the Boeing marketeers overruling the Boeing engineers. That's what happened. And they have not released that information. But even worse, do you think any of the Senate committee and the House committee is going to subpoena it? They don't use a subpoena. If these committees do not use a subpoena, forget about it. It's not going to happen. There's not going to be legislation. There's not going to be correction. We rely on the Justice Department criminal probe, which nobody knows how far up the chain of command in Boeing it's going because the grand jury proceedings are secret. But this is clearly a situation for a consumer boycott. People should not fly this plane if it's ungrounded. We have an axe the max button here. The one thing that Boeing can't control, they can control the politicians here, they can control the FAA, they cannot control millions of air travelers who damage the brand. They can't control damaging the brand. In fact, Edelman Associates has been working on changing the brand. They're trying to figure out how to do it so Boeing isn't held responsible for it and have the airlines do it. They want to eliminate the brand, the MAX, for all the reasons we know. So when people call up for reservations, if this plane is ever ungrounded, they ought to say to Southwest and United and Delta and American Airlines, what's the equipment? And they'll get the message. The airlines will get the message. The brand has to be destroyed in order to raise the concerns of the airlines themselves. And the pilots' unions ought to allow more free speech. Some of them have been talking up very properly, the pilots, but they ought to allow more free speech because a lot of them are scared. A lot of them are scared that if there's another crash, the pilots are going to be blamed.
Did all of you get a copy of what Mr. Nader produced here? Do you have a couple extra copies
Yeah.
that I could give?
Again, the focus is on...
And then I also need, there's Paul Giroge who wants to speak. He lost his entire family. He's been sitting in the hearing.
I have one. Thank you, sir.
You got it all?
Paul, now. Paul Giroge lost his family. He's from Canada. I know. You got what you want?
Yeah, we'll capture it.
Okay. It's Paul Njoroge. Giroge.
Can you spell your last name, please, sir?
That's Njoroge.
Okay. And you said your first name's Paul. P-A-U-L?
Yes, yeah, P-A-U-L,
Okay.
yeah.
How are you feeling after the first half?
Well, coming here and seeing Mr. Muilenburg, it's a lot of emotion, a lot of mixed emotions, and we just want to see him answer questions unequivocally. That's something that he doesn't do, and it's frustrating because we would want to get answers to some of the technical questions that he's been asked by the lawmakers, and he needs to tell us why MCAS was installed in that aircraft, and he needs to talk about the design of the aircraft and the positioning of the engines, and whether he needs to say unequivocally that that plane is prone to stalling, because if they will only fix MCAS, which is a computer system, I do believe that another plane will fall from the sky, because computer systems are prone to fail. And so it's all about that plane design, and so they just need to fix the whole, and they need to certify it as a new plane. That's the thing.
Do you believe that he's answering unequivocally?
No, he has never answered questions unequivocally. He just beats around the bush, yeah. and that's frustrating.
And can you tell me a little bit about the family members you lost?
I lost my wife. My wife was 33. My son was 6 years. My first daughter was 4 years, and my other daughter was 9 months, and my mom-in-law was 61.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Which plane were they on?
Sorry?
Which
That's the Ethiopian. They were traveling from Toronto to Nairobi, Kenya, so that's Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. Yeah.
And if you could, do you feel like committee members right now are doing their job?
Yes, because they have the right questions, and I think they should pressure these people to answer the questions and leave no doubt to those answers. I think they have the right questions, so I think they're doing a good job. Yes. Yeah.
And last night, some of the family members met with Mr. Muilenburg. Were you as part of that conversation?
Yes, I was. I wanted him to talk us through the corporate governance within Boeing, and I asked him whether he thought that they have some gaps in corporate governance, and he acknowledged that there are gaps and they are working towards improving corporate governance. They have appointed a new committee for safety. So, I hope that that will improve safety in aviation.
Is that good enough for you?
It's hard to trust, anything they say. It's hard because, from what we have seen, from what we have heard, and we've seen the evidence from Faulkner, the former chief testing pilot, I think so, and he when you see them talking about exactly what happened in the two crashes, and he talked about that just a year ago before they started flying these planes. So if that was not picked up, then I'm wondering whether they will pick up all the gaps that exist in that company and make sure that such a thing doesn't happen again. So it's hard to trust anything they say.
So between the conversation yet last night and his testimony today, have your feelings changed about his leadership?
No. Nothing really changes. There is always a question of the decision-making process between the first crash and the second crash. We know that he received a bonus of 15 million. We know that the board authorized stock repurchase worth 20 billion of stock. So, they just looked. And I asked him, why, as a father, and as a husband, why didn't you put yourselves in the shoes of the families of the 189 victims that perished in JT 610? Because that would have avoided another crash. And he says, Paul, I regret that decision a lot, and I think about it every day. That's not enough. It's not enough. He thinks about it because it's 8 months down the line now since the second crash, and there has been a lot of scrutiny from the media, from the public, from the lawmakers, from the families of the victims, and that's the only reason why he regrets, and that's why he thinks about it. Yeah.
Sir, should he be fired?
Yes, he should be. He should resign, actually. He should voluntarily resign. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe give your name. I apologize, I came in.
Paul Njoroge.
Do you know how to spell his last
Spell
name?
your last name for me, please.
Njoroge.
The hearing has started again.
Paul,
Okay?
thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'll send it. I'll text Pete.
We have two people. We have to say two for 9 minutes.
I understand that.
Could you take this and put it on a seat for me?
Line standers, is that what
If you're a line stander and you're not going in, please stand to the left. Everyone else, please come on in.